You're watching The World now on TVC News. Let's shift attention now to Sudan, where the United Nations Refugee Agency says more than 60,000 people have fled the city of El Fasher, which was captured by the paramilitary rapid support forces over the weekend. There have been reports of mass executions and crimes against humanity as the RSF fighters stormed the city after an 18-month siege marked by starvation and heavy bombardment. The UNHCR says the flow of those fleeing the violence towards the town of Tawila, about 50 miles west of El Fasher, had increased in the past few days. They reportedly narrated horrendous stories of atrocities, including rape. The agency is struggling to find enough shelter and food for them. More than 150,000 people have died in the conflict across Sudan, and about 12 million have fled their homes in what the UN calls the world's largest humanitarian crisis. The rapid support forces are now in control of Western Sudan and much of neighboring Kordofan, which is in the south. The Sudanese army is holding the capital Khartoum, central and the eastern regions along the Red Sea. Well, joining me from Nairobi, Kenya to discuss the troubling situation in Sudan is Director Suriva Africa, Charles Yakumbo. Thank you so much for joining us at this time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so how do you respond to the UN's warning that Sudan is one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises with over 30 million people in need of urgent aid?
Thank you very much. The situation in Sudan is really heartbreaking, and the fall of El Fasher, in my view, is not just a military event. It's not just a military collapse. It's not just a military loss, but it is more of a humanitarian collapse. You know, Darfur was one of the safe havens, and its fall today really signals that civilian protection has completely broken down, and that is really, really worrying. Now, the worst part of it is that the pattern of ethnic targeting and the mass execution, which really mirrors the genocide that occurred in the same place about 2 decades ago, is really, really worrying. And by that time, the United States and the entire world said, never again will this occur. So we are seeing the same script, the same story, the same effort, is repeating itself 20 years later. So it is not just about Sudan falling. This is a collective humanity, and silence in this case equals to complexity. So when we also look at even the response of the United States, it's good they have acknowledged that this is one of the world's worst humanitarian crisis and displacement. But my worry again with that is that it ends just there. There is very little that we are seeing is being done to enforce some of the, practical solutions that can really bring this to an end. Because if it is a world crisis, worst crisis, and I agree with the United States and the international community, then it should dominate our headlines. It should be something that we give priority. But I think because it is in Africa, we can just talk about it, but then we have very little to do in terms of enforcement. By now, if this was Europe, you would have been seeing emergency summits almost every week. Emergency summits with threats, with sanctions, with with the ceasefires. But today, because it is in Africa, we just see concerns, we just see statements, we just see policies, we just see just comments. So that is the worrying trend.
So do you think that because the world is not looking at this crisis as a crisis that's worth solving, do you think there seems to be a point where they need to control the narrative, especially as it comes from Africa?
Absolutely. This war that is going on is beyond the power struggle, and it's a competition of control of state and resources. And perhaps there's also legitimacy. And it started just like a joke. It started just like a funny crisis between the RSF and the Sudan army, in the transitional part. Then now we are looking at a full-blown crisis that in the entire region. So there is a lot of hope, and that's why I feel there is still need for more solutions can still be seen around. There is hope in terms of the Sudan civilians really offering aid, offering support, but that's very negligible. So in as much as it is in Africa, and we are acknowledging that this is the worst crisis that has ever happened in this our recent century, I still believe that there is still a lot of work that can be done either by the international community and, of course, our internal regional bodies like the African Union, like the IGAD, like even the ECOWAS, because if we are looking at millions of people being, displaced, the people, mass execution going on, neighboring countries like Ethiopia, like Chad, like South Sudan, now gets overwhelmed with the refugees. And then that then becomes not just a Sudan problem, it becomes an African problem. And then an African problem, then it again affects trade, it again affects regional balance, then of course, just sees a collapse generally. So that is, in my view, how then the community should then respond to this general crisis that we have.
So now that you have called it an African problem, do you think the African Union is adequately responding to this crisis in Sudan?
Very negligible, very negligible from where I sit. African Union, and of course the regional bodies, someone will say that they back from a distance. So you see two people fighting, then you tell them, please stop fighting. And as you continue to shout, stop fighting, they're not stopping the fight. So that is what African Union is doing. They are very consistent in calling for ceasefires. They are very, very aggressive in the dialogue, but they are not effective in enforcing them. So it is just now, just like as now we are having the conversation, we are condemning the war, we are calling for ceasefire, we are calling for dialogue and all that. But if there is no enforcement, then that becomes a problem. But then why is it so? So African, the regional bodies, there's a, in terms of the trust itself, countries like Kenya, for example, really, stepped in to mediate. Then it was completely politicized. Khartoum called Nairobi and said, there's bias. So that politicization of the entire thing then now makes African region then becomes weak. Then, of course, inability to look at the proactive, reading the early warning signs. Because I believe, where we had a genocide years ago, African Union would have learned, seen the, I can say the early warning signs, and they would have found a way to eradicate this before it gets here. So in my view, Africa leaders or African Union must stop outsourcing peace, and they must look for solutions within Addis Ababa, within Nairobi, within Khartoum, not from Washington or Riyadh, from where I sit.
That will be a fine place to leave this discussion. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you for having me. Have a good month.
Well, that's world now, actually. For more updates on the stories we're monitoring, you can visit our website.